Hello, C3RF members and Canadians across the country. It's Major Russ Cooper here with another session of In Hot. Remember, In Hot is fighter pilot terminology for rolling in on target with weapons armed and ready. And today our target that we're going to roll in on is Canada and its march towards becoming a draconian state, if not a police state. And today our able wing woman is none other than Tanya Gaw. Tanya, by way of introduction, is founder of the grassroots organization Action4Canada. She's a committed Christian and defender of faith, family, and freedom. She started the Action4Canada group. It's a nonprofit group with co-founder Valerie Price. And Valerie, by the way, is a director with C3RF as well. She's a very busy lady. Action4Canada is concerned with upholding Canadian Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. She began her journey 6 years ago, and she's working to give the silent majority a voice through letter writing campaigns, petitions, and rallies. They not only educate people on what is happening, but they effectively equip and encourage Canadians to take action. Of particular interest to me is the fact that Action4Canada is currently involved in or has commenced a legal action against the British Columbia government and the federal government effective 16 August of this year. So we'll have a chance to talk about that. But by way of starting, Tanya, I got to ask you, 6 years ago, that stuck out in my mind. What happened 6 years ago that kicked you off down this path?
Well, probably we're going to have a similar story here, Russ, and thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to our conversation, but Justin Trudeau was running, to be prime minister of this country, and I didn't like what he was, his party policies and what he was campaigning on. It was a really extreme concern. There was multiple issues, but one of the things that was in the forefront of my mind was the legalization of cannabis and recreational cannabis for the fact that they were going to be putting it legally in the hands of 12-year-olds. And I think that everybody should have a problem with that. And it was not in any way to, lessen the drug trade. It was to make the Liberal government the greatest drug dealer in our country, as I believe they were hoping to profit greatly from this at the expense of our children.
Okay, 6 years ago, as you say, we do have kind of overlap there, because it was a little bit later that I started feeling compelled to do something, and it was what kicked me off was Motion M103 and the move to criminalize Islamophobia. I thought there was a lot of false narratives involved with that initiative, so I started writing myself. But I can see where you felt compelled because of the advent of a new government. Now, you talk about equipping people, and this is really interesting, because most of us we write letters, we do petitions, but you actually get into the business of helping people get themselves on track to being their own advocates. And I notice you have a system of notices of liability. Can you talk to that for a bit?
Right. So I'll back up just a smidge. When we were talking about what happened 6 years ago, I was never political. I was never an activist. I would vote and do my civic duty. And so I just wrote my very first letter, and I sent it to my MP. I arranged a meeting to go to my MP's office with other people and address this issue. And Ken Hardy is a diehard Liberal socialist communist agenda guy, along with the whole party. And, I was naive back then to think that, that letter was going to make a difference and bringing people to his office. They really did have a very targeted agenda going into the 6 years and previous to this. We can't write off Stephen Harper right now and say that he didn't have a hand in the sustainable development goals and some of the things that he avoided taking care of, like placing people in the Senate or appointing judges. And the more I learn about this gentleman and how far back this plan goes, I started 6 years ago. You started maybe a little bit less than that. And I look at all the, warriors that were before us, trying to ring the bell and make a difference. And so, it started with the one letter. I sent it out to some friends, and I kind of got this image in my mind that we need to give the silent majority a voice. because some of the conservatives would say to me, you know, we never hear from conservatives. They don't write us letters. They're silent. You know, they were all the ones going to church and putting their kids in school and the programs and working and paying their taxes and, you know, supporting everybody else's charades. And so it just kind of grew into the call to action campaign, through the letter writing and the petitions and the rallies. And then when COVID had hit, I knew instantly that this was just another step towards ushering in socialism and communism into this nation. You and I met through Motion M103. I remember you being, you know, denied a voice. Was it in the Senate? Or was it in the House? They wanted
I applied to be a witness during the Senate testimony, the related Senate testimonies on M103. I think they had me listed as a standby speaker, but I never got the call. So no.
Right.
No.
Yeah, and so through that time as well, I met Valerie because she was heavily trying to bring awareness of the rise of political Islam in Canada. And so then it proceeded. And so, you know, we know that the UN is very heavily Sharia compliant. We know that, you know, they're very much aligned with communist China. And so when you've got the WHO trying to tell you what to do with this sudden emergency and pandemic with nobody bringing any evidence, and you know that Trudeau has been pushing billions of dollars out of this country to impoverish us. I mean, we're at the bottom of the G7. We're in the worst shape that I think we ever have in the history of this nation. And then all of a sudden, he's got millions of people reliant on the government for their daily living. And so it was just so obvious so quickly what was happening and how quickly our rights were being taken away from us. And so with that stripping of the rights, and it doesn't take much to look into our charter and the Constitution to understand that nothing that they have done is in alignment. Everything they've done is in violation, even of our criminal code. And so when people's rights are being stomped on like this, you have to be able to, the biggest part is educating the people to say the government isn't taking your rights. You've literally handed them right over. Okay, so, how do we take that step between them handing them over and understanding that they can stay and be empowered and stand on their rights and not have to worry about any consequence of that if we all stood up together? So when they were coming in and saying, I'm so sorry,
No, I got a couple myself. That's fine.
Sorry. All right. I'm working from home. Anyways, okay. So the biggest direct violation where the more majority of the people could see that this was happening when they were starting to mandate these experimental treatments. Even the push to wear masks. I mean, masks are not legislated in Canada. There is no law saying you have to wear a mask. A mandate is not law. Therefore, you do not have to wear a mask. You should have never been felt compelled to wear a mask. They're useless. They don't help. The top health officers in this nation have been on testimony as expert witness saying masks don't work against viruses, especially a respiratory virus that is aerosol size. Yeah. And so all of these rights are being stomped on. So we started with an exemption back in the fall because even I, didn't realize that if you put forth an exemption, you're actually saying what you have mandated is legitimate. And so I've really taken a turn in the last couple of months saying, we don't need an exemption. We don't need to write an exemption. We don't need your approval not to wear a mask. I can make my own health decision. And the whole point of masks was to make sure that bodily fluids, don't spray into the faces of nurses and doctors. And what people also have to understand, when they're in surgery wearing these masks, they are actually balancing the oxygen coming into that room.
Okay.
Which the general public doesn't have that option. You're being deprived oxygen and they're being fed more oxygen while they're in that room. And they're not going, it's an important fact to understand, right? Yeah. Because these masks are causing a lot of harm, not just the oxygen deprivation, but the bacteria and, the psychological war. the feeling of feeling like you have to have this in order to go shop, or you have to have this to get onto a plane. So we did a notice of liability exemption for children. It was very successful. Anybody that's been using these either on the bus going to school or giving it to the principal, the masks are coming off the kids. And so I've really got to encourage parents to get a hold of this notice of liability.
Well, Tanya, just right there, can I share my screen, because I have your liability page up on your Action for Canada page, and I want to show people. If you can see that, it's the Action for Canada website, actionforcanada.com, right up here. Can you see that, Tanya?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, and you have this is the COVID legal action page for COVID notices of liability, and you have a number here. You have COVID testing notice of liability that you're just talking about. But you go on to list parent-child notices of liability. I expect these go to educators on behalf of your children.
Yes.
Post-secondary, employee, elected officials notice of liability. There you have all your arrows in your quiver there to basically do what? What do these notices do, Tanya?
Well, they put the individual on notice. Like, for instance, the ones, so we went from the masking, and as soon as I had completed that in the spring, I think it was in May, that Bonnie Henry here in BC and the fella in Nova Scotia all of a sudden said that children could go and get vaccinations without parental consent, 12 to 17 years old. So we got real busy, and I created the parent-child notice of liability. Now, when you click on that page, there's two in there. So one is for someone who has a child that's actually in school, and the other is for someone like me. My kids are 26 and 28 years old, but I still wanted to take action. I still want to be an advocate and protect children against this very dangerous and harmful experimental injection. And so Action for Canada took the one from Concerned Citizens, and it's the same as the notice of liability for a parent, but you don't have to put a child's name on there or the name of a school.
Okay.
And so we sent it to every single Minister of Education in Canada and the head of every teachers union, all 60 school superintendents in British Columbia. And then in June, it went like wildfire. So we have parents groups, and in Ontario, they were sending it to as well to the unions and to teachers, to the point where in June, the unions in Ontario, Rocco had reported this to me, were sending the teachers a letter saying, do not discuss vaccines in class.
Oh boy. Well, okay, that's a huge change just in and of itself, that one result. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and we're having great results. The next one I did was I had a friend who was being challenged that he absolutely had to take a vaccine from his employer, or he was going to lose his job. And so I created the employee one. And yesterday I was really happy. I was helping a parent whose child goes to a private school, and I was helping form a letter, which I am going to edit slightly and make available to all parents across Canada. And she ended up saying that she has a friend, and the employer said, oh, you have to have the vaccine or you're not going to be employed any longer. And he immediately served them with the notice of liability.
Yes.
The employer sent it to their lawyer, and by the next day, the employer had him in his office. This is true story. And he said, there's absolutely no problem. He's not going to, let him go. And he actually went home in a new company van that day.
Oh boy. That's a fantastic result right there. And I think it's important to get back. I'm going to roll back to what you said previously, because if you go ahead and succumb and apply for an exemption or go along with anything the company wants you to do in regards to mandating anything, then you lose your rights under the charter, because you are basically saying, okay, I go along with you. Is that true?
It is 100%. And it's taken us a while to catch on to that fact. But when I was in Ontario about 3 weeks ago, and Rocco and I were discussing this, and he's going through, of course, large actions against the universities and colleges in Ontario. And we were discussing that if kids were putting in exemptions through the school, that they actually probably wouldn't be part of a legal action, because you've already consented, to the fact that, that in some way you need to provide this information. And so that got me busy taking a look at anything on our website where we were requesting the right to be mask free. And we don't need to do that. You don't need, I've never requested regarding the injections. My stand there has always been from the beginning that you are unlawfully recommending and coercing someone to take an experimental injection.
So
and
if
that
you go
liable.
to them, if you go and request something, what you're doing is you're admitting that they have the power and they're in control, and it's their agenda that you're saying you go along with.
Yes, a really big one right now. We have what's called we finally named it the Wednesday Night Empower Hours with Action4Canada.
Yeah.
And it's the last 2 weeks I've had a Q&A where people could just come on and ask me whatever questions. And last night it was remarkable how many nurses were saying that they had been given a notice stating that they had to double jab, that they had to mask, and that if not, that they had to have a duplicate COVID testing per week. And so one of the notices of liability on our page is against all COVID testing. I didn't put rapid testing or PCR testing because Bill Gates and Fauci have bought some sort of new facility. I haven't had a chance to look into it, but they've already said that the PCR tests will no longer be used. They're not effective. They're admitting this, but you know what? We're going to wait till December 31st until we stop using that system.
That's right. That's true.
So whatever they've got up their sleeve, right?
Yeah.
So I specifically said COVID testing. Nobody has a right to force any medical treatment on you, period. We don't need to ask. So this notice of liability. So I said right away to the first nurse who had come on, I said, first you serve them the notice of liability against the testing, any COVID testing, and then you serve them the notice of liability against the injection. And these are powerful documents. And then as far as the masking is concerned, you say, I do not consent. There is no law in Canada that says that I must wear a mask. And the reason is because they can't, because it's a violation of my human rights and my constitutional rights. People have to learn the language in order to defend their position. We are in the right. We are standing 100%, with what we know is allotted to us, given to us by our founding fathers.
Now,
all of those great freedoms.
Now, talking about the law. Oh, and by the way, I think Mr. Hardy made a big mistake, and he angered the wrong person when he didn't answer your letter there, I think. But talking about the law, it seems to me that what we have is a situation where our whole system of legal jurisprudence has been circumvented in Canada. We have directives coming out of international organizations like the WHO, and these are kind of flowing down into our public health sectors in Canada, federally and provincially. They're getting, they're becoming weaponized at that level, and these medical bureaucrats are coming out with these mandates that are rubber stamped, it appears, by our politicians, and we're expected to comply. But in our system of jurisprudence, it's supposed to be our legal system that handles this through a representative democracy, and we should have a chance as citizens to have our representatives pipe up on our behalf with regards to this whole which way we should go with these mandates and with the situation itself. So is that kind of where Rocco has gone with this thing? Is he saying that is he saying in your court case that proper legal jurisprudence has not been followed?
Well, yes, and even to expand it, because it's not even good enough anymore that we make that statement. We know, and the majority of people in Canada are starting to realize that all of our rights and all the protocol that should have normally happened in a state of emergency has not been followed. Yes. The government doesn't care. They've got their fingers in the ear saying, la, 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 I don't see, I don't hear you. We've got a globalist cabal plan and we're going for it. Yes. And we are going to crush all of your rights. So if we look at this from the onset, one of the major things that Rocco has been committed to was to take down this PCR test. And it's a 97% false positive rate. For those that may not be able to understand how the PCR test works, the creator of it said it was never meant to test for coronaviruses because you can almost find any single molecule in every single person. Because if you had a flu shot a year ago, if you have any kind of coronavirus that you had 6 months ago, just a normal regular flu, this machine can pick that up. And it will specifically do it when they turn up the amplifications. So
Yes.
it should normally be used at 25 or under. If somebody really had some sort of serious symptoms and they weren't getting well, you go to your doctor, you're not recovering, do you need antibiotics or not? They might send a blood test to the lab, and they may use the PCR test. What they're doing now is they're taking perfectly healthy people with no symptoms, who, by the way, cannot spread a virus. If you have no symptoms, all right, you're asymptomatic, and they're testing people, they're turning the amplification up to 35 to 45 until they find this similar molecule in your system. And that's why they have a 97% false positive.
I think Ontario uses 42, I believe, is what their cycle amplification is in Ontario. Yes.
Right. And so you can see that the news is going cases, 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 rather than deaths, deaths, deaths. And the deaths based on Health Canada's website are in line with the yearly influenza. So Rocco has the top expert witnesses now retained in order to give testimony before the courts for this, for masks, for social distancing, you know, the psychological harms to children. The whole thing is just such a diabolical charade. And we've been calling it out since the onset. I wrote a report called Government Corruption and Colluding with a Foreign Syndicate. I started it March of 2020, and I released it in April. In May, we did a call to action campaign, a letter writing call to action campaign, where we sent it to every single premier. And I asked people to BCC me, and I got responses back about 80 times. So you figure if a premier's office gets, a letter 80 times, somebody in that office is going to open it. And so this report was part of it. So it asked them to lift the lockdowns, get their citizens back to work, and that if the federal government wasn't going to protect its citizens and look out for their best interest, then it was up to the leaders of the province. And oh, by the way, also read the attached report and commence an investigation against the federal government. And in there, I had listed everything, what this was doing to small businesses, to our children, to the elderly, the false information, the ID 2020s, the fact that they were trying to take people's DNA, that they were going to try to be controlling them, and Trudeau's ties to Gates and Fauci and the rest of them. I even met with the top RCMP in BC, July 28th, a year ago, and laid it all out for them. So this is at all levels.
What was the RCMP's response, Tanya? What did they say?
Well, you know, the fellow that I met with is actually a really good guy, but he was like, oh, well, we're meeting with the health officer every week. And I said, I talked about the hydroxychloroquine and the other treatments, and that they weren't being made available to the public. And I looked right across the table. I said, this is murder. And it's like, well, you know, we're in a pandemic, and I'm listening. So there was still that belief that so many people were into the delusion. And so I said, I believe that the premiers, the prime minister is making backroom deals with the premiers. As well, you know, unless you have any evidence of that. So what do you know, in the fall of last year, but the Belarus president comes out and says that the IMF and World Banks had tried to bribe him with nearly $1 billion to implement the emergency measures.
Doesn't $1 billion sound familiar? Didn't Trudeau himself come out and say he was going to allocate $1 billion so provinces could better implement their vaccine passport program? I think that $1 billion kind of rings a bell. Yeah.
Very good point. So we can see, you know, that it's been from the onset. So the reason I'm building that picture for a moment is that what people need to understand is that Justin Trudeau never enacted the Federal Emergency Act. He never implemented it. He then, because had he done so, he would have lost control, because they had to give demonstrable evidence, 100% evidence that we were walking into a pandemic. And had he done that, he would have had to go before the legislature, and you must have public input and debate. So he just didn't even want to go there. So that's why I believe, this is my theory, that he's making these backroom deals with the premiers. They probably have had themselves hands paid very, very handsomely, and they've gone along with this. Or maybe, you know, they're being threatened in some way. I don't know, but who would do this to their country with all the evidence that we have? So then the provinces ended up creating these bills, such as Bill C-16 here. I believe it's Bill 195 in Ontario.
Let's talk about the provinces for just a second here, because you've pinpointed the federal government not declaring a federal emergency act because they would be obligated to justify the maneuver, the implementation. But I've gone and I've looked at these provincial emergency acts. In Ontario, it's the Emergency Management Act, I believe it's called. And in each and every one of these acts, there is a clause in it that says that nothing shall override the rights and freedoms associated with the charter as you implement these provincial emergency acts. So what we have is the provincial governments going ahead and going along with public health mandates without having to provide any proof, any evidence that our charter rights need to be limited in any fashion whatsoever. But that would put the provincial premiers and our legislatures squarely outside of the law, because they are obligated to show us evidence that we really need to have our freedoms restricted, locked down, socially distanced, and all the rest of it.
That's 100%. That's right, Russ. I mean, when they pass these emergency measures provincially, as an example, I'll use BC because they did the same thing in every province. So it was tabled June 23rd of 2020. And this bill gave sweeping powers to the government. Oh, sorry about that. Sweeping powers to the government. It exonerated them from any and all harm that it would cause. And now I wonder, right? Because back in April, when we did the call to action, we had said to the premiers, you will be complicit and we'll be holding you responsible.
Oh, you bet.
All of a sudden, these bills are saying, hey, by the way, we are not going to take any responsible if our actions are harming you. And then it gave almost all power to the federally appointed lieutenant governor in every province. So this is in complete violation of the Constitution Act of 1867. It's in complete violation of all provincial legislature protocol, where they as well needed to come before the legislature. So it was tabled on June 23rd. People found out about it. I found out about it on July 1st. They were getting ready to go to the provincial legislature to have conversation about this and to express their objection to it. And all of a sudden, the province passed it through second and third reading. You just can't do this. So that's why I'm saying there is nothing lawful or legitimate about any orders. You don't have to follow any of it. You stand your ground, you keep your business open, you allow people to shop and exit and enter your store. You have no right to ask anybody for proof of any injection. I'm not going to call it a vaccination because it's not. And there's absolutely no restrictions that are permitted right now. All of it is a farce. And they've had people convinced because of the fear-driven campaign that got us to where we are.
Yeah, I look at it from the perspective of Canadian citizens having the right to petition their members of parliament and a responsible government to reflect their interests and their concerns. And I think what we have now is we have a situation where that whole system has been shunted aside, and we're now being ruled by international organizations that tell our medical professionals, bureaucrats, I don't even know if they're professionals really, what to do and how to do it, and they're forcing it down our throats. And we're this whole aspect of the Charter of Freedom and Rights being our core legal justification for anything has been written out of the situation. It is absolutely horrendous.
And, people have to remember that the UN is an unelected body who's interfering with our democracy in a very serious way. And I have been coming out, whether in rallies or interviews, saying that anybody that supports them is a traitor to this country. It's just this fine line in the sand that's drawn. Canada Health was, I understand, developed and designed by the UN, by the WHO. So Health Canada is an arm of the UN. And this is why they have people like Teresa Tam, like Bonnie Henry, like Hinshaw. All of these people have, if you go back and investigate, have some sort of tie to the UN. I just found out recently that the head of the BC Human Rights Commission has deep ties to the UN as well. And these people are being handpicked across the nation to ensure that we are oppressed and that there is this massive takeover. And the notice of liability is so effective. What I had done here in my city is back in March, prior to me doing notices of liability officially, I had sent a letter of notice of liability to my mayor and city council. It was an email form. And I told them it was regarding, there was these vaccine signs, and they had this like, be a superhero with a cape on and saying, report COVID deniers. And it's like,
Wow.
this is reminiscent. Yeah, right.
Oh, that's the East German Stasi type stuff. That stuff. Wow.
I said it immediately. And I says, these need to be removed instantly. All of a sudden had a huge letter writing campaign against the city, phone calls saying, this is not right. You were elected to support the people in a democracy. These need to be removed. Their lawyers got involved. I said, they said, oh, we're taking them down. They took them down by the following week, and they were going to replace them with signs to get vaccinated. And I said, you are opening yourself up to huge litigation, to liability by doing that, because these are already on record causing great harm, and you are promoting them. You have no business promoting these. Anyways, they ended up silent on the whole issue. We remain that way. I know people that work for the city, and none of them are being mandated to take the jab. And so it is very effective that if you are, I've made it now easy for everybody, because now I've got an elected or appointed official notice of liability. And this goes so far that you can even, anybody who's appointed. So we're talking about a pastor of your church. All right. We're talking about a committee over sports for your kids. We have notices of liability to protect everybody, but there's a couple more I have that will be coming out. I just launched a new one on behalf of businesses.
Yes.
And I wanted to just wait so that I don't forget. I have created, if I could find it here for just a moment. It is a liability. It is on the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act. And it was on the page right under where it was for COVID testing, right below it, go printable PDF. The Non-Discrimination Act on the testing says it's actually a criminal offense. And the reason I've made that resource available, so if you're going to travel, a lot of people are concerned about coming back into Canada. So you have you're apparently, forced at the airport to take this COVID testing, but you're not forced, you're choosing. You tell them, I don't consent, and I'm going home now. So they may try to intimidate you and pull you aside, and the police may come over and you say, I don't consent. And you can fill out, you ask that officer's name, you put their name at the top, and it's not officer or corporal. So I always say Joe Smith, it would be Joe Smith. You're serving them as a citizen in Canada, stating that for any harms or any losses of income, anything like this, you're going to hold them personally liable if you choose to take this to court.
Yes.
And then the non-discrimination resource, I am recommending that people first hand this to whomever is trying to force them to take a test, and saying, I'm giving you an opportunity right now to make a choice. I do not have to take this test by law. And if you violate it, you could be held up to $1 million fine or 5 years in jail. So now that person is being informed of something that they genuinely, I guarantee you, most likely they don't know. And then you give them the notice of liability. If they continue to persist and choose to say, you've got to take a test, you say, absolutely not, I don't consent. The officer may give you a fine, $3,500. You just accept it, you turn it over, and you can test it.
Yes.
And Rebel News is doing a great job with Fight the Fines. And as we see, they're being dismissed. They can't process the fines because it's in violation of your rights. So you go home, they're going to say you need to do a spit test or something while they're watching you on camera, and say, no, I don't consent.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
there is no way that they can force you to do this. So we're really trying to educate and equip people. And the other one that we're doing right now is for business owners who have health officers or WorkSafe or anybody else coming in, just to bring awareness for the business owners and for your viewers. They are now called environmental health officers. And I've had since Monday here in BC of this so-called Vax passport that Bonnie
Yes,
Henry, she has
yes,
no
yes.
power or control. We have no emergency here in no emergency order. Mike Farnsworth, the Minister of Safety, canceled it June 30th. So
Mhm.
what she's working under, all of us are like a little bit perplexed. So she has no power. These are all bogus, but just say they've got these environmental health officers now coming to businesses, emailing them saying, hey, you know what, we got a complaint and we heard that you're not following the protocol of the health officer's order. And so now we've got a very, very powerful form that they can now submit to the environmental health officer as Joe Smith, remember.
Yeah,
He
I
doesn't
think,
have the protection of his organization behind him anymore.
and what we're beginning to see, I think, Tanya, is we're beginning to see that more and more police officials and officers are beginning to understand that they are on the hook here. If they are going to intimidate you, mandate you, do this or do that to you on the basis of these bogus mandates, then they're liable as well. And then we're starting to see them become part of the opposition to this whole scheme of things. But
It's true.
speaking about opposition, we should we have politicians, we have political representatives. Why aren't they speaking out on this? We all the major parties who have seats in parliament right now, I can't think of any that are saying that this this needs a rethink, a relook, maybe go the way of Sweden or do something different. Why? What are they doing?
Well, we can certainly see how in World War II, Hitler ended up getting an upper hand for a period of time because it was all about self-preservation. When I listened to these nurses last night who are being told that their job is on the line, that they will be put on leave without pay, how can they do that? And so, we're going to equip them saying this is in complete violation of our rights. We're doing another charter rights resource as well on our webpage, and I highly recommend everybody. I'm going to have it up in the next day or two. It will be under legal action, under charter right resource. I'm
Okay.
putting it all on there so it's simple. It'll be probably about 4 pages or 5 pages, but there is so much from the criminal code, from the Constitution, from the charter, the Bill of Rights, everything that supports our position. We're on the side of right here. And maybe we should be sending this to our local MPs. So back to that, I believe that the MPs, the city councilors, the mayors, they're all so chicken to stand up and be on the side of right here because they're not equipped and educated. So by you signing the notice of liability towards elected officials, there is no way they can read that 5-page notice and not be well educated
Mhm.
because we have medical information. We have the legal cases at the Supreme Court that have been won. We've got the criminal code in here. We've got the offenses and we've got the charter rights. And so by the time, we say, I'm going to hold you personally responsible, they're all of a sudden not so worried about what the globalists are saying. They're worried about the fact, will this person actually pursue this in a court of law? I've now been put on notice. And so people have said, well, where do we go from there? I says, if they come back and say that is of no consequence, you need to be equipped to remind them that in the Nuremberg trials, that I was just following orders didn't fly,
No,
right?
that's so
It,
true. That is
it
so true.
worked for them. And
Mhm.
how I've been comparing this lately is that even in the simplest act of us wearing a mask or going along with any of this, we are supporting the government's criminal actions. And so it's like somebody's going in and robbing a bank and they got the getaway guy in the, car driver. And he's feeling coerced into driving the car. He doesn't want to be there, but who knows what this other person has over them. You're going to drive this car or whatever. And so they end up getting caught. The police, they're both going to get arrested. And this guy saying, I was just following orders or I was coerced isn't going to work. We all have a personal responsibility in this. And that's what it comes down to. It is creating an environment where our elected officials are feeling the weight of their personal participation in this scandal and this criminal activity.
I think they have to come to understand that the globalists, as you say, didn't put them in power. It was their constituents that did through a legal electoral process, and maybe that's where their loyalties should lie. That's the across the land, we can see that Canadians are becoming to get engaged. I'm looking at. I've been writing about the election 2021 for a little while now, and I've been surprised that when you look at the media, when you look at the politicians and what they talk about, they're all talking about the ballot box question being, oh, it's childcare or it's housing costs or affordability. And I'm thinking, we just gone through a year and a half here of continuous shutdowns, lockdowns, rights being removed, restricted, being told what to do, basically living in a police state. And now one politician is talking about our individual sovereignty, our rights under the charter, and now one of them think it's a big deal. I guess except for maybe two parties. Maybe there's the People's Party of Canada and maybe there's a Christian Heritage Party are talking about freedom. And it's kind of funny to note that especially the PPC, they're going through a surge of support right now, and everyone's perplexed and surprised in what's going on here. But what do you think about that surge of support?
Well, I'm excited about it. I've worked with Maxime. I know Rod Taylor from the Christian Heritage Party. We have promoted and supported both of these parties. Recently, Maxime was in town and I spoke at two of his rallies, and the energy and the excitement, you're actually proud to be a Canadian, and you're excited about what this country was founded on. And you feel hope within that party with what Maxime is doing. And I listened this morning to Andrew Lawton's report on the People's Party and what Maxime was doing. He's doing it on many different parties. It was so well done. And Maxime spoke so well for himself and the surge. And, the bottom line is that it is because he is recognizing that this is absolutely, between not just different parties and ideas, but between freedom and tyranny.
Yes.
And he's willing to call it out for what it is. And I just so appreciate that. And that's where the support is. Canadians are counting on our democracy and our freedom for the future of this nation. And, those who aren't supporting it, I hope that some of them have a real shock and surprise when, the ballots are counted. There's, concerns regarding that. I heard this morning that there's a huge surge of mail-in ballots. And
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I don't know anybody who's mailed in a ballot. And so who are the scrutineers going to be in the room that day?
Yes, I'm very suspicious of that whole initiative. Really, I don't know what kind of controls are on it. They certainly haven't been advertising what they're doing to protect the integrity of that particular process. Very concerning. That's for sure.
But,
So we have all these politicians, and most of them are saying, are giving me the impression that they don't really care about our human rights, our freedoms, our individual sovereignty. And quite frankly, I think they all look a bit silly as a result.
I agree. And, if you see my calls to action that I've been sending out, I've given support to the CHP. And like I say, I've given support for the PPC. And I guess there's some conservatives who are really concerned about, the actions that I'm taking, because I got a phone call from a former MP who's well known in these parts and apparently has close ties to Aaron O'Toole. And, these men, a couple of them on the phone with me, and they're saying, we're just, Tanya, we appreciate your work and what you're doing, but we're very, concerned about the splitting the vote. And I went,
Yes.
Don't even bother with me, gentlemen. I said, if you're worried about splitting the vote, I says, you can call Aaron O'Toole and you thank him. He's responsible for this. I said, he is a globalist cabal hack. I said, who is destroying the democracy in this country. He's destroying the Conservative Party. And I said, if you've got good MPs that you say are great Conservative MPs, I said, have them cross the aisle and join the PPC party right now. Let's do this.
Yeah,
right?
but I'm hearing that PPC for one party doesn't doesn't really seem to be drawing votes from any one particular party. They seem to be drawing votes from all the parties. And
Because
it makes kind of sense because they're the only ones talking about individual sovereignty, and all the other parties are talking about childcare.
yeah,
So,
I mean, Russ, you know, if you've heard me speak at all, I do go back to talk about what this country was founded on, and how since Pierre Elliott Trudeau, they have been very strategically chipping away at our freedom and democracy for 50 some odd years. And the reason is that he brought in the idea of multiculturalism. There was no vote. No, Canadians didn't have a voice into, you know, saying and maybe doing a study on what this looked like for the future of our country. And so multiculturalism has created nations being built within our nation, where this is where there is no controlled immigration and supporting integration and assimilation, and 100% learning the language. So now it was like, oh, we're no longer, you know, multiculturalism. Yes, we're multiculturalism, but we're also secular. So we're no longer a Christian nation built on Christian biblical foundations. We're now the secular nation. And I say that's very, very scary step towards tyranny. And I say, if you don't believe it, do you remember what Justin Trudeau said when he came into office?
oh, he said we are no longer a nation. We're
Post-national state.
post-national state with no core values.
Yes, with no core identity.
That struck me. That just about bowled me over. I spent 29 years in the military in the Air Force doing what I thought was defending those core values, the values of individual liberty and rule of law. And I was surprised to hear that we didn't have any more. But
Well, and you can bet that
I missed something in the translation, maybe. I don't know.
right? And as I bring to people's awareness, you got to understand that you can't be a nation with no identities, and he's filling with something, and that's communism. And
Well,
so
well, I think this diversity of strength is a cover for that. It's certainly it's collectivism of one sort or another. It's certainly not individual freedom and sovereignty, and I think that those individual rights, those are the things that make a Western liberal democracy as powerful and as attractive as they are, because everybody. That's the one thing that can unite everybody. I have my individual rights and freedoms. As long as I don't step on yours, you don't step on mine. That is a big, big unifying factor for a country to have. And it seems like we're just throwing that out with the bathwater.
Right. And that's because I think you can relate to this. This is a military style psychological warfare. And it's been very, very strategic. Diversity is our strength. What a goof, right? Like, and how silly of people to believe that. Come on, let's get our critical thinking going, common sense. And I'm just going to say it. Our country it's a Judeo-Christian nation. We inherited it through our British Commonwealth. It forms our laws and our values, and is a system of governance that sets us apart from totalitarian extremists and communist regimes, giving every Canadian the right to believe or not to believe without fear of oppression, persecution, and even death. And so I say to people, would you rather live under this secular communism, or would you rather live under a nation built on biblical principles? And if we look at the countries that are being most persecuted and oppressed right now, it is those countries that are based on biblical principles. The UK, America, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. This is no coincidence. They're not worried. What impact will they have on the 57 Muslim majority countries? There are people living there who would love to be living in Canada right now with our freedoms. So if we don't decide that I'm not going to listen to the government calling me a racist because I believe that people immigrating to Canada should integrate and assimilate. Were we a racist when my mom and dad are immigrants? My mom is from Holland. My dad is from England. My mom, her 4 brothers, and my grandmother, they signed up for English lessons right away. And my mom said we wouldn't speak Dutch in public because we were so grateful to be here. We didn't want to offend anybody. And they worked to learn the language. Do we have that respect going on in our society today? Would I be called a racist or intolerant for saying that I expect that when I'm standing at the bank, I understand what people are saying? That I'd be able to have a conversation with my neighbor that's a lovely neighbor that's been here 16 years and doesn't know the language? I don't think.
As a matter of fact, you probably expect in today's Canada that you could be sorted into one group or another and maybe shoved off to an internment camp, because that seems to be the way we're going with this vaxxed and unvaxxed uh, boundaries that we're building, putting in place in Canada.
Right.
That
Yeah.
seems to
So
be where we're going. I'm glad to see that we had a chance today to put up your tools there, your notices of liability. I think those are huge assets. I think everybody should be very interested in taking a look at those and using those to protect their rights and defend themselves. And before we go, Tanya, is there anything you would like to? You direct the audience to anything that you're particularly interested in? Your websites, your initiatives, anything along those lines?
yeah, thank you, Russ. One thing that we have launched last week, and it's huge, is we are putting chapters across the nation in every city and town. And the reason that we're doing this, I think we already have upward of 30. We have a list of over 100 people who are our chapter leaders. We're vetting very quickly. We have, for people that come on board who have been vetted and approved, a chapter resource page. So it tells them exactly how to set up a chapter and how, from our Facebook pages, we go from the corporate Facebook for social media. And we also have something called the super spreaders. If you want to be a part of that, if we launch a notice of liability, for instance, we have a social media campaign called the super spreaders. We send it out to that
How
team.
appropriate.
And they send it out across the super spreaders, a better kind of super spreader, right? Very positive, gonna really save this nation. We had a good fun when one of our gals, Jenny, came up with that name. We thought, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. And so the chapters, since last year, Action4Canada had launched our business campaign. We've got amazing materials where we're going into small businesses and saying, are you aware the government's plan is to get rid of all small businesses so that we will be controlled by large corporations and we won't have a choice. And already hundreds of thousands of businesses have been shut down. So we have a business meeting that meets every Tuesday that business owners are welcome to come to. We have a parents team. We have a team for church leaders. We have a social media team, videographer team, writing team. We have thousands of people who are signing up to volunteer, and we thank you. Unfortunately, we can't get to everybody, and we're trying to go through that process. But what we've done as an answer and alternative is we're setting these chapters up across the nation, and then each chapter would have a business leader, a leader that would reach out to the church community, and a leader for the parents. And so, for instance, the parents may want to have a meeting with the school board and the trustees to oppose, whatever, maybe the critical race theory or the climate change garbage that's coming into the schools right now. And so that parent under that chapter would coordinate that. And then say a business owner is in trouble and needs support, we would reach out to that whole community of church leaders and parents and whoever else and say, this business needs support. We would come around a candidate, whether for school trustee, city council, and we're going to find those candidates. We're going to promote them. We're going to help them within that community. And we're going to take back our school board trustees. We're going to take back our municipalities, and we're going to take back our provincial and federal legislature. And
it sounds like clearing house might be a very, very good idea, because I think Canadians are getting the impression now, or beginning to get the impression, that there's a whole lot of secret handshakes going on here behind the scenes that we're not aware of and that we didn't vote for. And
right.
maybe replacing some of these folks is a good idea. Now, you say that all of this information can be found on your website, Action4Canada. That's the number 4, action4canada.com. And people can go there to see how they'd like to get involved.
Yes, thank you. So the chapters and the notices of liability are huge. If you can join Action4Canada as well, then you'll make sure that these next couple of notices of liability, as long as you're on our email list, we'll make sure that we get that into your hands as quick as possible.
Okay, I tell you, I'm going to get the word out loud and clear. And thanks very much, Tanya. This has been a great and informative get together. I really appreciate your coming to talk to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. You've been a great ally. I appreciate your work so much as well. And I'm glad that, we're teamed up on this effort to support and protect Canadian rights.
Okay. With that, I'd say goodbye, Tanya, and we'll see you later.